what have I invested today, which is going to pay for tomorrow?
Welcome to Island Influencers, where we share stories of successful business owners, experienced professionals, entrepreneurs and community leaders based or with influence in the Isle of Man. This podcast is brought to you by Thornton Chartered Financial Planners, because great financial planning has the power to change your life. Now here's your host, Chartered Financial Planner, Sharon Sutton.
My guest this week on Island Influencers is Manx Credit Union Chairman David Talbot. Together with his wife Ravina of 50 years, David has been a leading light in the Manx community, from his business involvement in Manx and Overseas to his third sector leadership in the church, Patrick Commissioners, and most recently, the successful launch and running of the Manx Credit Union. I hope you enjoy the lovely conversation I had this week with David Talbot. Well, David, lovely to have you on the programme. I wonder if you'd mind, for the benefit of our listeners, just letting us know all about you and how you've ended up here to this point in the Isle of Man. So where do you come from? Where were you born?
Originally in the Rossendale Valley in Lancashire. We came to the island in 1975. Rossendale was very much an area that was dominated by boot and shoe manufacture. And I had a job as a cost clerk working with the company secretary to look at new ranges and to discuss with various managers around the factory what it would cost to do this extra little bit of a thing on a shoe or a slipper or whatever. So I got to know quite a lot about how to put together a shoe and what the cost would be. Yes, so that was quite interesting.
So your family are all from that sort of area, and that where you went to school? And,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, my wife Ravina lived in Stagstis, which is just a bit farther up the valley, the Waterfoot, where I was born. And we met each other through, actually, we're both in separate churches, but they decided to have a joint minister. And he had a Sunday evening youth group. That's where I met Ravina, and the rest is history.
Oh, my goodness. What age were you when you met?
We'd be about 18.
Gosh.
I got married 1971. So this is our golden anniversary year.
Oh, my word. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Great. So when you left school, did you go to university?
No, not at all. I had a wonderful school life, but it was all about playing football and chess. I wasn't interested at all in academia. And so I left school with 2 very poor O-levels and not a lot of interest in what I wanted to do next. Interesting, in that time, we never ever thought as young people that we would find difficulty in getting a job. We knew we had to get a job, but we just thought we could walk into one. And in those days, in the 1960s, it wasn't too much of a problem. I remember my father following me around after each of the 3 interviews which he'd laid on, and the report he got back was about the same each time. Well, he seemed an interesting lad, but he didn't show any interest in the job. So then I actually saw a little advert, which was in Bury, which is about 7 miles south of where we lived. And I went along, and it was a radio and television company, so it's slightly more interesting. And I had the interview, and then after the interview, I was shown round by the boss into the office, into the service department, and then he opened 2 very wide doors into what just looked like our youth club back home. Because there was huge, 2 massive billiard tables. I'd never seen the like before. Table tennis table, darts. Thought, this is the job for me.
Right.
So I went back home and told my mother very excitedly. She said, well, how much are you going to get paid? I said, well, I never asked. I was only interested in the fact what we could do at lunchtime and after work. So it was at that time that the boss said, well, all the lads here all go to day release to learn how to be a television engineer. What do you want to do? And he said, I'd better go and find yourself a course. So I went to Rottenstall College of Further Education, and I found a course called the Certificate in Office Studies. So I started to do that. And during that course, it began to dawn on me that unless I actually worked hard at this, I wasn't going to get very far at any kind of career. So I actually was the top student in the end of the first year, which is very exciting. My parents are very proud of me. Yeah. After 2 years, I finished that certificate, and next in line would be the Ordinary National in Business Studies, which I did. I'd done O-levels with the certificate in office studies at the same time, so I got the basics, and then doing the ordinary national, I did economics, accounting, as well at A-level. So the next decision really was to go on to higher national, but my parents were a bit reluctant because it would mean full-time study. And I was totally discouraged by my employer from doing that. The company secretary at that organisation said, no, lad, what you need to do, you need to work and study at the same time. And that'll give you the best grounding for your future career. And he was a company secretary, qualified, and encouraged me to do the same qualification. He said, it'll give you a good grounding all round, and you can choose the accounting stream if that's what you're particularly interested in. So that's what I did, and it was aged 28 when I'd been 3 years on the Isle of Man. They actually finished qualifications that were necessary, because in those days, as still applies today, it wasn't so much of passing an exam. You had to demonstrate by 3 years that you actually been in employment where you could have exercised the skills you'd acquired. And also, if you wanted fellowship, then you've had to show that you worked for a public company for 3 years, which I was fortunate in doing, because the company that brought me to the Isle of Man was taken over by a company which some of your listeners may remember, called Manx and Overseas.
Yeah, that's right.
Organisations such as Todd's and North Industrial Equipment and so on. And we became part of that because the top end of the board I went to join wanted to retire. And so my friend, my colleague and I were left, if you like, holding the baby and looking after the company that was taken over. And we became part of Manx and Overseas. After 2 years, we were actually invited to look after all the Manx assets, and had great fun looking after all the businesses I've just mentioned and others as well, which were acquired.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, gosh. So that got you your pathway to getting your fellowship of, was it the Chartered Secretaries Institute?
Correct. It's now changed. It's called the Chartered Institute of Governance.
Is it?
Which is an interesting change, but it spotlights the fact that these days governance is a key element, and a lot of charter secretaries work for government departments and business, charity, and so on. So it's quite a wide ranging qualifications we're expected to see, and we're quite a thriving group on the island, actually.
Yeah. Yes. It was called ICSA, wasn't it? So that
Indeed, yes.
Yeah, the institute is. It used to be very active when I knew it was called ICSA. It totally bypassed me that they've changed their name. Well, gosh, that's commendable, I suppose, given you left school with 2 O-levels to have, gone through a whole professional framework of vocational exams, I suppose, but professional nonetheless.
They're hangs to tail, really, because I remember when it came to the third year, when I say year, there were 4 parts to it, and you could in actual fact take time to do each part. And then the third batch, there were 4 subjects. You had to pass them all at the same time, otherwise you had to resit them all again.
Yes.
It got a little bit lighter later on where they split it into modules, but I remember the first time round I passed 3 out of the 4.
Right.
Second time round I passed the 1 that I'd failed and failed the other 3.
Oh no.
Third time round I failed the lot, and then 4th time I passed them all. So it's quite an interesting, I had to show a lot of determination to get through that. And I must admit, my wife helped me amazingly and encouraged me.
Yes.
Without that kick up the pants from her, I probably would have said, well, I've got quite a good job. I think I'll leave that now. But I was so pleased that I carried on and completed it.
Yes. Well, you don't ever fail anything, do you, until you give up, I reckon.
Yeah, well, I think you just have to learn to get up again and keep going. Failure is not necessarily the worst thing that can happen. It's a great teacher. Just make sure you don't make the same mistakes again.
Yeah. No, indeed. Gosh, I keep trying to impress in my son. He's 14 now. That for goodness sakes, make the most of being at school and being a full-time student. Because I guess when you have to do your exams and study and work and, by the looks of it, raise a family at the same time, there's only so much time, isn't there?
Well, there is, and I think getting the work-life balance that we hear so much of right is an impossible task. We all get it wrong, and certainly looking back over what I've done in my career, I think, well, yes, there are lots of times that huge amount of time was spent at home, and always in that situation, looking back, you wish you spent more time on the beach having an ice cream with the children than behind some desk somewhere, which all seemed very, very important at the time. But really, getting that balance right is something, as I say, we try our best to do.
Yeah, I think maybe we kid ourselves that one enables the other, whereas the price of an ice cream, it's just the time, isn't it? So you did the Manx and Overseas MBO, didn't you?
Well, what happened was that the company that I was working for, Wolson's, became part of Manx and Overseas in 1985.
Yes.
And then in mid-1990s, a change of direction was dictated really by the stock exchange, who didn't understand what we'd done. We're a collection of retail, wholesale, and so on. And they decided that when we added an internet service provider to the collection of companies that were running on various properties, that really the time had come to specialise. And so the board introduced a new set of directors, and we decided we didn't want to leave the Isle of Man because we were going to have to do that because everything was sold off, and they wanted to go into property in the UK, and that just wasn't for my colleague and I. So that was the time to exit, and we were given the task actually of disposing all the Isle of Man assets, and they kept us on to the last minute because they knew that we were interested in buying back the company that went into their group. And so the end of, I think it was 1999, or thereabouts, we were able to find a backer because we were just working lads. We couldn't afford to buy it back ourselves. So we found backers, and we went back into running the company that I went to join in 1975.
Gosh, yeah, full circle.
Yes, and we did that for about probably about 10 years, I think. And in the meantime, it became quickly apparent that there wasn't sufficient work for me to do just one company. So I went part-time, and then I started an accountancy business, which effectively offered the same services that I was offering the group, where providing management accounts, tax returns, and that sort of thing. So I did that for another 10 years before I decided it was time to retire.
From paid work, so to speak.
I was going to say retire from remunerative work.
Yes.
There were lots of things I was interested in, and I've become interested in various things in the community, which you may want to talk about.
I know, absolutely. That's what I was going to move on to next. When you did that, you found that you'd founded and looked after a church for 7 years in your spare time somehow. What was that?
Well, that was, I came about because when we came to the island in 1975, as I said, we joined a Methodist church at St John's. They'd stopped their evening service because for a lack of attendance, and we decided that it was about time we were getting, shall we say, thirsty for a little more lively worship. And we've discovered that other people similarly felt the same. So we had an interdenominational Sunday evening time together where we got the guitars out and had a great time of jamboree, really.
Okay.
And then, funny that 7 years keeps cropping up. Maybe it is what there's an expression about that, isn't there? But there are a lot of people who are coming who got interested in the Christian faith, but they couldn't find a church to settle into because these are people who've never been to church before. Right. So I decided to start a fellowship group based in Peel, which became known as the Alamo Community Church. And after another 7 or 8 years, they wanted a full-time pastor, so I passed that on to someone else to manage.
Oh, goodness, that's pretty outstanding, really. So to start a church and then another job created. Actually. Yeah, so you're still at it, aren't you? These schemes where you set up as a charity, and then it just runs into a business. I mean, particularly, I wanted to talk to you about what you've done in the last few years.
I'm interested in politics, although I didn't like to use the word. I was just interested in the community and how we could bring about change, and so therefore it's put to me I should become a commissioner. Yeah. So
what inspired you to go and decide to stand as a local commissioner? Because was it Patrick Parish?
Yes, Patrick Commissioners, and there was an election coming up within 12 months, and a few friends said, well, why on earth don't you stand? You seem to have a lot to say about the community. Why don't you actually stand? So I very reluctantly at first went into that. And it took quite a while to get used to how things were run. And I stayed there 2 terms, so I was 8 years there altogether. I became chairman of the Alamo Municipal Association. So that was a gathering of 24. I think we had 21 actually who became members of that, particularly at the time when politicians in Douglas were talking about this wonderful scheme of 4+1, whereby they wanted to see 4 authorities joining together in the community. In the rural settings, and then they'd have Douglas, of course, would be number 1. So 4+1 was an idea which was going around, which we didn't think was actually very beneficial to the rural areas, because such a lot of the work that's done in the community is done pro bono, and what we could see was if you joined together and you had paid this, paid that, paid the other, you'd lose a lot of that contribution, which was all voluntary, and
right, I see.
Felt that on the ground we were the best people to actually say what was right for our community. But we were always open to ideas, and we actually worked very well with the 5 local authorities in the west of the island, from Kirkmichael to Peel to German, Patrick, and so on. And we actually worked together as a unit when it came to such things as the amenity site, first class police servicing. Can't remember what the title of that organisation was.
The Western Police Neighbourhood Watch or something, isn't it? And then the swimming pool as well, the Western Pool.
Correct. Yeah. So we all 5 of us had different tasks to perform. And,
I remember I was on the Sports Council at that point. So I did a bit of dealing with the 5 local authorities and how they worked together brilliantly from what we could see.
Yeah, it was a really good time to experience what actually goes on in government too, because you're mixing it with government ministers, civil servants and the like, and you had to learn really how to get what you wanted, point things in the right direction where you wanted to go. So eventually it became obvious if you really want to get change, then maybe I ought to think about being an MHK, and I had 2 goals at that.
What did you really want to achieve when you decided to stand as an MHK?
Well, by that time, we'd taken quite a strong interest in the operation of credit unions, and I could see that there were a whole bunch of people on the island who felt excluded from financial services, and what was the best way of bringing these in so that they could take advantage of all that's going on in financial services. And it seemed to me that we weren't making a lot of progress in bringing people in from the coal, so to speak. So I thought, well, why don't we see we can't get elected and do some work from the inside? So that was my main motivator, apart from the fact that I was generally interested in what was going on internationally as well, because I had strong feelings about our involvement with the UK and so on. So I felt that, it might be a very interesting time and appropriate having sort of served my apprenticeship as a commissioner, in terms of becoming. And it is a very good route, and I always commend people, if they're interested in politics, by all means sign up, do a term as a commissioner, and that'll show you an awful lot of what can and can't be done. First time round, I stood against Alfie Cannon in Michael. I got a good thrashing, and then second time round, I stood against Mr. Boot, and I lost by 2 votes. So after 6 months hard work, knocking on doors and spending a lot of time at meetings and so on and so forth. But as it happens, I could have stood 12 months later, because that was a by-election. Mr. Anderson had retired. Yes. And I decided that I wouldn't go any further because I got an inkling that actually we were going to get the changes that we were looking for to actually start the credit union. So I bowed out of politics at that stage.
So you achieved what you went into. You basically achieved your main objective.
Yes, and also it gave me great insights and got to know a lot of people on the inside, MHKs and the like, and that became very useful when I wanted to actually broadcast what we were doing and look for some political support.
Yeah, gosh, that's an inspiring story, actually. You know, to have gone in and to have done that and actually realised that you'd made your point, achieved what you wanted to achieve. That's fabulous. So, do you want to tell me a bit about the Manx Credit Union? Because it's for those of our listeners who maybe don't appreciate how it runs. Well, you'd be educating me. I know a little bit about it, but why don't you tell me the main objective of the mutual organisation, which is what it is?
Well, the underlying core value really is to encourage people to save. That's at the heart. I know we use the word credit in the middle of Manx Credit Union, but essentially it's all about encouraging people to save, to realise the joy of saving, and to start a plan, to think about their future more, and to say, well, we're likely to need X, Y, Z in the future. Or it may well be that emergencies will crop up, and rather than ending up in the arms of rather expensive credit union really is all about the members for the members. So all of the surplus, we don't talk about profit, all the surplus that we make is available to be given back to the members, or to develop, or to build up the reserves that we need for regulatory purposes.
Right.
So savings is the main element. But of course, we all need to borrow from time to time.
Yes.
So we've got a range of products which people can make use of, and they'll always find they get the best deal where they've actually committed initially to save.
Okay.
So people do walk in off the street, want to become members so they can borrow at favourable rates. But those who have saved regularly are going to take advantage of some of the products which lean towards benefiting those who have saved.
Okay. So somebody walks in off the street and they're going to, I guess, if they want to borrow money straight away, that they can't do that because they're not a member and they haven't ever had a track record of saving.
Well, you can actually put in an application for a loan simultaneously with applying for membership. If we hadn't done that in the beginning, then we would have got nowhere, frankly. They would have to waited 2 or 3 years before people built up their savings. We did think that was the appropriate way to do it,
Sure.
but it wasn't quick enough to actually get building up our reserves. And the only way we could do that was to actually put out loans and collect the interest on that for, as I say before, for development purposes. And of course, most importantly, our members can enjoy now, as they have done for the last 2 years, a dividend. So it's a mixture really of creating surplus from our loans so that we can do new and exciting things and some new products which we've already introduced and will be introducing this year.
Yeah. So for people who go in to save, just to be clear, normally you would go to a bank and you would do some savings and you'd expect a rate of interest, but you don't pay a rate of interest, you pay a dividend instead.
We pay a dividend to our members each year, yeah, so that last September 19, we paid a dividend in a AGM that followed that financial year, 0.5%. And this year, when we got to February AGM, we were able to declare a dividend of 1%. Yeah. So if you'd saved the maximum, as was in those days, of £5,000, then you've got a £50 dividend.
Yeah, it's not bad if Bank of England rate is 0.25, so to pay 0.75.
And it's on instant access account. You can have your savings out any time you want. So it's really just an average of the savings balance over 12 months. And you get the dividend applied to that rate. Fortunately, we have software that does all of that. I thought of having to work out for every individual the average. And it's done on almost a daily basis, so we get an accurate figure.
Yes. Imagine how they used to do it, big ledgers. Yes, we can, can't we? We've both seen it in our careers.
Well, yes. I mean, I love working with Excel, but that would just take it a little bit too far for me.
Yeah.
And so the actual rate of interest which a member will pay on a loan is largely dependent on how much they've shown an interest in saving to begin with. But we have a basic loan product which you can apply for. We think that's an attractive rate anyway, as soon as you become a member. It's more likely that when you become a member and you want a loan, we have a starter loan for £500 and you can go with that right away. And then later on, next time around, you can increase and increase. So eventually it's all about relationships. Credit unions are relational institutions, and it's all based upon the fact that we get to know people, they get to know us, they get to know the staff, and it's all about actually, at the end of the day, the relationship that's developed, that's that wonderful word that is important in business is trust. And we trust each other in doing that. One of the big things that I always remind people about when they take out a loan is that you're actually borrowing other people's savings. It might be someone at the end of the street savings you've actually just borrowed. So it's a much more intimate relationship.
Yeah, it does sound it.
And
Yeah.
other types of financial providers.
Yes, but we all know things go wrong from time to time. And does the person from the end of the street whose money that you've defaulted on come around to knock on your door and say, "Give me my money back," or is it?
I think there might be problems with GDPR there, but yeah, I mean, things do go wrong, because if someone borrows a few thousand over a 3-year period, anything can happen during that period. We always do a budget with people when they want to take out a loan, so the standard 3 months bank statements, 3 months pay slips or evidence of income, go through a budget with them so that we are satisfied that we've met our obligation, a regulatory obligation, that we're actually lending money and the repayments of which a member can actually afford. So it's very important to us that we establish that the person can afford it. And if they can't afford it and we agree that, then we always give them a plan so that next time when they apply, they're in a much better shape to actually make that application. But things do go wrong, and it can be loss of job. It can be breakdown in relationship, long-term illness. The COVID-19 has presented particular challenges to us.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah.
So we have to monitor very carefully what happens. I mean, fortunately, most people are able to continue making their payments. They see it a priority to keep the credit union going. But there are cases in which we have to have, shall we say, discussions with people about their commitments to pay back what they've borrowed. And we can come to all sorts of arrangements. We can freeze the payments for 3 months, as we did during COVID for a number of people, or maybe longer if necessary. Some people have left the Isle of Man and in seeking jobs in the UK, only to find that they've been caught in the pandemic, and they can't easily get back to the island. In fact, probably don't want to get back to the island because they've gone back to where they originally came from. And consequently, it's quite a challenge, is that, because we have to sort out with them repayment structure. And of course, there are from time to time people don't want to talk to you, usually because they're embarrassed. It's not that they're actually defrauded you in some way. They genuinely feel awful about the fact they've let you down, and they don't really want to discuss it until they've got some full-time employment again. So there are a few challenges when it comes to the loan book, but generally speaking, if it's monitored properly, and I'm sure anybody who's involved with credit control will know that if you monitor it and build up a communication with your members, with your customers, then you've always got an entree into where they are, and you can have that discussion and you can come up with a plan to actually help them reschedule and end up being something that is mutually satisfactory to both parties then.
Yeah, sure. No, thanks for explaining that, David. And I'm sure you've hit upon the main principles there of having a community in which everybody has an interest and there's trust. You get to know people. Yes. The relationship aspect of it can't be overstated, I don't think. So the credit union, is it do you belong to a larger organisation of co-operatives? Have you got some sort of framework to best practice source to go to?
There are in these islands about 400 credit unions, and there are 7 trade associations. We're part of UK Credit Unions, which is based, as it happens, back in the town where I came from to come to the Isle of Man. So it's quite easy for me when I was visiting relatives to pop along and see them. And also underneath...
Do some research.
Underneath where they're operating was the local credit union as well. So it was quite a useful way for me to learn. And they've been extremely helpful in keeping us on the right track. I can pick up the phone anytime and ask them if we're developing something new. There isn't anything new, really, that we want to do that's not already been done in the UK. Occasionally, we've developed 1 or 2 loan products, which we think we're quite pleased with the way they've gone forward. But generally speaking, we look at other people's websites, think, oh, that's a good idea. Let's think about how we can incorporate that into what we're doing.
Yeah.
So one of the main things, for example, that we wanting to do is to, as I said right at the beginning, to bring in from the cold, if you like, those who feel financially excluded. And so one of the products which we developed it's called the family loan, and that's where a person can borrow up to £500, and they can pay for that out of their benefits. So Tynwald in 2019 passed a special order allowing credit unions to be one of 3 organisations on the Isle of Man who could receive payment by that way.
Right.
So people who, for example, can have their rent deducted from their benefits. They can have utility bills paid through their benefits. And so we developed a product, worked for quite a long time with Social Security and with Treasury to arrive at a point where someone wanted to borrow, say, £500, they would pay £12.50 a week or the equivalent thereof. £11.50 would pay the loan, and £1 would go into savings. So right from the beginning, we got people involved in saving. So, okay, £52 at the end of 12 months is not a huge sum, but in actual fact, some people, £52 is lots of money. And so we should never deride small amounts, because they can be very precious to people, and actually helping them to discover, as I said earlier as well, what it's like to save and to be able to be quite proud of themselves that they got a nest egg that's developing.
Yeah.
And also they started to ask questions, well, what should I do about my children? Can I not open a savings account for them? And so you're just planting seeds really all along, whilst initially they wanted to come in because £500 seems a very attractive sum to have. And then we explained to them about the savings elements. And as we're going along now, we only started this in November last year. We got to over 100 people came in just before Christmas and wanting one of these loans. And so whilst it's receded a little bit, the demand, we expect it to start building up again. Yeah. So that was one product which would be very appropriate for people who felt that that they could get their hands on that sort of money. Because at the end of the day, £500 to a commercial bank is just not a proposition.
No,
it's not worth bothering about.
No.
You go into most banks, they'll pass you a leaflet where loans start around about 7,500, and anything less than that, frankly, isn't economic to them. I understand that totally. Whereas we work to a different model. We work on a volunteer model, so we can ignore some of the mathematics involved with calculating things. At the same time, always keeping an eye on the fact that we have to pay our expenses, and we hope that we will are in a position to pay a dividend at the end of the year.
And Tynwald also, I think, approved an increase and set the savings limit, didn't they? Because you could there's limits that you can save in a credit union. Just to look at the other side of it.
It was 5,000 initially. The 1993 Credit Union Act is based on the 1979 UK Credit Union Act, so it was quite out of date, shall we say. That was part of the original reason, one of the 3 reasons we had to sort out before we could start, because when we started, we needed to think about was there actually a need for this on the Isle of Man? What about the legislation? Did need that updating? Yes, it did. And of course, we had to fundraise as well to get it off the ground. So I think the figure we raised was about 62,000 from our pestered friends and ex-colleagues, and some people who came out of the woodwork, so to speak, because before we'd actually got off the ground, there had been at least 5 attempts to start a credit union on the island, and lots of these people came forward and actually joined the working party which we put together at the beginning. It took about 3.5 years from first calling at the FSA and asking about a credit union, what was going to be involved from a regulatory perspective. And I always remember the young man that I saw after I walked out of the office, as I walked out, he said, well, I hope I've said enough to put you off doing it now. I suppose I was going to be organisation number 6 that didn't make it. And there's some very, very nice people who had actually aspired to start a credit union. And I remember when we actually came to the day when we opened the doors, I actually found the lady who'd started the idea of a credit union on the Isle of Man. And she was with a group of health visitors in the north of the island who became very concerned about the poverty aspects of some of the housing in the north of the island, and they thought credit union was the way forward. Well, they're absolutely right. And if you remember the late Dr. Edgar Mann,
I do.
And a number of other people, influential people, got together, but for one reason or another, it didn't progress. But they had got in place the '93 Credit Union Act, which was a great step forward, and it helped us. Whilst there were lots of things about it which needed updating, as you imagine, and we were starting in 2016 and based on effectively a 1979 Act in the UK. So as we've gone along, we've talked and discussed with the regulator, who always found very helpful, I must say.
Yes.
And we've managed to step forward and bring ourselves almost up to date with what happens in the surrounding islands. But that was one of the steps that we wanted to put in place, and that was raise the amount that people could save from 5,000 15,000, although we changed our policy as well at the same time. So the maximum amount that you could save on a month-to-month basis is £250. Because what we're not, Sharon, is an investment vehicle for people. We're here to encourage people to save, not to think of the credit union as a place where you put a lump sum and enjoy the dividends thereafter. We're interested in all the community, because the credit union is not just about people who can't normally get their hands on credit. It's for everybody. So right across the spectrum, we've got people who are just interested, and at the same time, I always say looking after money is a deadly serious business. Actually, it's quite a lot of fun being part of a credit union, because you actually feel you're doing something that benefits the community.
Oh, absolutely.
And also, as banks and post offices all retreat to a centralised place, then credit unions are very well placed from a community perspective to prosper in that environment.
Absolutely. I mean, this is above and beyond, isn't it, what normal people would do in their retirement, Dave? I mean, David, you really should be congratulated on, such an extraordinary, undertaking. It's great. The credit union is based in Douglas at the moment.
Yes.
Bearing in mind what you just said, is there any plans to open in the community?
Well, we've had lots of cooperation, in actual fact. Some people might always be surprised to hear this, but we have had cooperation from local banks. So Barclays in Ramsey have let us use their foyer once a month. So if you go into Parliament Street, Ramsey, you'll see a big banner about the Manx Credit Union. So we've enjoyed being there. At the end of the day, a lot of the ideas that we've got for the future totally depends on people coming forward who are willing and competent to actually run a satellite branch somewhere. So that's the key to it. It's not a willing. It's not a fact that there's no willingness to do it. We would love to open in Castletown, Peel, and Ramsey on a more permanent basis. And we have been to all of those three to introduce ourselves to the communities, commissioners, and so on and so forth. But to have a permanent place there to set up satellite links and so on.
Lots of overheads, so cooperation from within the community. So anybody listening to this might, if they happen to be involved in some sort of institution that could lend itself, pardon the pun, to providing a facility for the credit union in the community would be appreciated, I guess.
And very much so. We've not been short of offers, I have to say, of accommodation where we could go. The problem is, or the challenge is to us, actually getting people who are prepared to actually turn up there for a few half days a week and actually man that. And and we're prepared to do that. We're prepared to train people as we do, because although people don't receive any payment for their labours, we do give training to people about the software, about regulation, about money laundering, and all these things that we have to do as a licensed body. So, training is given, and we would love one day to be more involved in the urban areas, which at the moment we're only can concentrate adequately on Douglas, and that's only 3.5 days a week. So after 4 years, we may well in the future, I hope the board is not listening to this next comment, that we'll have to be able to expand out into other parts of the island.
Yeah, I know. It occurs to me that there's so many charities that you probably do. I mean, do you collaborate with anybody right now?
Yes, we do. for example, the Salvation started a debt service recently, and so I've been in touch with the person who runs that, and occasionally we do get people who will seek financial advice, and if people do that, then we always agree with them that would freeze the interest and negotiate with any particular debt service. There are others on the island too who do offer some kind of help. And what I don't want to do in my retirement is duplicate the services of others. I'm only interested in offering services which perhaps haven't been available on the island. And that is true, actually, of lots of things that I've done. I'm a great starter of things. And after about 7 or 8 years, quite happy to pass them on to other people.
Yeah, sure. So financial education is a pillar of our society, and it always strikes me as quite odd there's no education, little education in the wider curriculum, other than we've got a marvellous charity here in junior achievement that does provide some sort of financial capability training to people. But no, it just occurs to me that money being the root of all evils, but certainly a source of problems in society. That organisations like Citizens Advice, who they do a lot of good work, and they deal with people, but they're dealing with people who've got a symptom of having money issues, who turn to other things in order to get themselves even further in trouble.
Well, that's right. And I think you mentioned there a charity I don't know a lot about, but we'd love to work hand in hand with them, because one of the things that we are waiting to do is, again, it comes down to finding the people to do this, but we have got an entry into a local school who want us to come and set up a savings organisation for the school children, which they themselves will operate. So
right.
In that particular school, they don't want us to come in and do it for them. They want us to come in and teach the children how to be a cashier, for example.
Fantastic.
So little Johnny can sit at a screen and take in a pound from some of his classmates, all come up with £1 a week or whatever it is.
Yeah,
and that software which he will use is linked directly into our software. And so the only thing that we need to make sure is that we turn up at some point and collect the cash. So we can get the schools actually involved with and it's not a new concept, is it? It's something that's been there. I can remember as a child in a savings club, my Uncle Bill used to operate at the bottom of the Sunday school, and we go in and take our 2 and 6s or whatever it was, and he would have a piece of wallpaper that stretched from one end of the table to the other with names down one side and then dates at the top. And then at the end of the spring, I guess it would be, we'd go and collect our brown envelopes with all that we'd saved up. We're ready for our holidays, which was great fun.
Yeah, there you go. That's a very cornerstone of trust right there, isn't it?
Yeah. And in those days, of course, you could collect a lot of interest, so the church got the benefits of the interest, and we got our savings back. But actually, so that's not a new concept, but I have a feeling that this is something which we could work very well in schools, particularly if they're doing it themselves, getting used to using financial software at a very basic level. And as long as somebody in the school can look over their shoulder, then that's fine, and that could work. And so that's another aspect of our work which we'd love to do, the education side of it, introducing the savings element into schools, getting parents involved, and so on and so forth. So that's one area which we would very much like to see more work done on.
Lovely. Okay. Well, if you don't mind, we'll just move on to the questions that I ask all our guests. I mean, if you don't mind me asking, and primarily I do ask people in my role as a financial planner, which is, quite interesting having this conversation with you today. But what's your earliest memory of money, David?
I think it's probably my mother, really. My mother, as my parents, Ravina's parents, all worked in the factory locally, various factories. One was into bread making and one into textiles, 2 into boot and shoes, as I mentioned earlier. And but my mother decided that she wanted to no longer work in the factory, and she actually started a sewing business, and she would make covers for 3-piece suites, and she would sew these at home, having gone to the house and measured them up. And my task was to take the package, which was neatly wrapped in brown paper, round to the house where it was originally ordered, and I would have to collect the money. So that was my first introduction to money. And my mother went on to be a hairdresser, and did that for several years from our home. And I remember feeling a little bit cheesed off with it because my brother and I had to share a bedroom thereafter rather than have separate bedrooms, because the salon was actually in one of the bedrooms. So that worked very well. But actually, I then began to understand, as I got into the profession I chose, then my mother looked at me to actually do the accounts for her. And I understood really how small businesses, the pressures that are on them to find capital, to actually keep proper records, and be able to submit a tax return at the end of the year. So that was my introduction to money, really, and I put that down to my mother.
No, thank you. Well, that moves very neatly onto what would be your number one business tip.
Well, I think I remember going back to my first boss, and he said in his broad Lancashire accent, he said, "Keep your nose clean, that you'll do all right." And I think what he meant by that, he said, "Work hard and keep your nose clean." So I think what he was saying was that, yeah, if you really want to get on in life, then you're going to have to prepare to work hard. Yeah. Neither my wife or I ever had any inherited wealth, so everything that we've achieved in life has been through what's come through the pay packet, basically. And so to work hard and to study hard, and bring a level of honesty and integrity to the job, that's really what he was saying to me, and it was very, very wise advice.
Yes, no, absolutely. So, I mean, with all the things you've done in your life so far, what's given you the most fulfillment, would you say?
Well, I think this is satisfaction, of course, of bringing up a family, and I think sharing something which you can build together. I've said a lot about myself, but most of this would not have happened without the support of my wife. And I think that is paramount, really, to anything I've done. She's given me 100% support in all of these various ventures. And without that, it wouldn't have happened. So I think actually it's building something together. She's been very much in the background, my sort of champion and PR and all the rest of it. And now in latter years, she's become an open university lecturer, so
yes.
boots on the other foot in some respects. But nonetheless, we're both very busy in doing these various things, and it's something we've built together, which I think is a great sense of joy. And even laterally now, we've got a little allotment which we love working on, and that's something we found that we can do together, and that's a great satisfaction in life, really. And also actually seeing your children develop and grow, see what their challenges are, and seeing their children come along now. So that's great to see all of that develop. Yeah. I think when it comes to the end of the day, I'm not going to say on my deathbed, I wish I'd worked longer at the office. I think what I'd be saying was, I wish I'd probably spent more time devoted to the family, but I hope they all think that I've not done too badly.
No, I would say not. What do you do to relax? I mean, how do you keep your life in balance? Is that the allotment, really? Is that what you're doing?
Well, we enjoy walking. We're planning what we can do during this current lockdown, and we do quite a lot of discovering things, even after 45 years on the Isle of Man. But still discovering areas we've not visited before. We've had a little walk around the Lure plantation and the reservoir up in the north of the island. That was a lovely walk. And other glens as well, which we found and discovered and thought, well, this is great. Why on earth haven't we seen this before? There are lots of lanes and avenues and all sorts of places around the island. So even though it's 31 miles by 13, we're still discovering places we've not been before.
Yeah. Isn't it? The Isle of Man is great like that, isn't it? It's quite remarkable how you can all of a sudden you think, oh, where am I? I don't feel like I'm in the Isle of Man. Where was the last place you found like that? You found a new spot. What was that?
Well, we, as I say, we went recently down the south of the island and discovered quite a number of walks down there which not been on before. And also going back to the north of the island, we had a walk up to somewhere we hadn't been before, actually. I suppose it's quite an admission, but to the Albert Tower, and then walked down from the Albert Tower, down across the TT course road, and then down onto the beach. And that was a lovely area. And found a little pathway which we'd never seen before, which is next to the railway line as that crosses the main road. There's a little path that goes down to the beach there, and that's a beautiful spot.
It is, isn't it?
And we really enjoyed that. It was like being in the Mediterranean, because it was a beautiful sunny day, and we really enjoyed that.
Yeah, you're describing my childhood stomping ground, David. That's exactly where.
Is that right?
Yeah, oh, totally. Yeah, that's where I'm from. Yes, I know that path very well.
So now I was just going to say, one of the things that you're asking me about advice given and that sort of thing, but I remember one of the simple things that was said, and I didn't really understand it at the time, but I totally understand it now. And that was an expression that was given by one of these inspirational speakers, where he said, make your past pay for the future. And I had to think quite a bit about that, what it meant. Now, of course, you're into financial planning, so you want to advise people how they carefully look after their assets and their money. So in many respects, it was about making the right decision financially, but it wasn't just that. It also covered health. It also covered other activities that you're involved with, which would actually assist you in your development. So there are many things which we can all do in our earlier days, which can help look after the body. I remember a colleague of mine used to always say, when I offered him a cake, I always forgot to use a celiac, so he couldn't have cream cakes. He would say, oh, my temple is the body, or my body is the temple, should I say. And so in that respect, I could understand that. If we look after ourselves earlier on, that's an investment for the future. Notwithstanding, anybody can pick up something, but generally speaking, if we invest in our bodies, if we invest in our education, then later on that's going to pay dividends. So it's just the same with financial matters. If we look after our money, ourselves, our surroundings, then we're going to actually that will pay dividends and pay for things later on in life, which perhaps we weren't able to envisage at the earlier stages, because it involves a lot of sacrifice if you're actually going to invest in time. So a challenge at the end of every day is to say to myself, what have I invested today, which is going to pay for tomorrow? And it's not just financial, it's all aspects of life, really.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So what would you say are the main challenges that the Isle of Man faces?
I picked up a very interesting leaflet, actually, from UNESCO Biosphere Isle of Man, and I've often reflected on the three things in there which it felt to be very important. As this is an election year, as I reflected on, I thought, well, this is a really good opportunity to discuss with anybody who knocks on my door what they think about this. And the first point was that about conservation, second was development, and third was knowledge. And conservation being taking care of our amazing landscape, of course, wildlife, culture, heritage, our communities, through everything from marine conservation to community clubs. So in a sense, conservation is something that we're engaged with every day of our lives, really. Development can be a bigger thing, but actually it also can be zeroed right into ourselves. It's all about improving our infrastructure, economy, in ways that respect and support our unique environment. Buying local, minimising waste are just two examples of that. And then thirdly, our knowledge, really, helping more people to understand what makes the island so special. Encourage active involvement in keeping it that way. So I guess those are quite three very good underlying aspects. And of course, the Isle of Man now was awarded UNESCO status, and it was the first country, if you like, that has ever been awarded that status. And I think these three elements I'm mentioning are excellent foundations to go forward. And I know that there are big topics for us to work out as an island, and there'll be the usual things that crop up in the election, which I hope won't dominate too much, but that is reform of local authorities and reform of the upper house, which occupies so much time, but we actually do absolutely nothing about. So I guess some of the things that were discussed at the last election are going to be the same again this time. What we're going to do about public sector pensions, old age pensions, and so on. And I am very interested in, as I'm now reached that wonderful age where I can call myself an elderly person, actually how we can utilise all the knowledge, the experience that people have had in their lives, because we are in great danger of writing off people just because they've reached a certain age. I think a lot of people imagine that once you reach retirement age, you don't pay taxes anymore. But there have been two studies done recently which demonstrated that people over the retirement age, whatever that might be for a person these days, they actually are net contributors to the exchequer, people often think, oh, we hear such expressions, oh, they're a burden on us,
Yes.
and so on and so forth. The reality is quite different.
Thank you very much. That's such an interesting point. I'm really grateful to you for highlighting that. It's so important. I guess put the shoe on the other foot would be, well, if you factored in the cost of healthcare, however, if you made you pay for that.
I think the thing about that, Sharon, is that it's the fact that the last 10 to 15 years of a person's life are the time when they're most likely to need healthcare. And I know it's a big topic, really, of how we're going to manage that into the future. We're all living a lot longer, but nonetheless, it's not when you reach 65 or in your last 15 years. Your last 15 years could start in your 70s or 80s even.
No.
You just don't know when that's going to be.
No.
So we've got to work out this big question: how are we going to look after people in that last period of their life, and how can we begin to plan for it? There's no easy answers.
They can't manage to get to any conclusion in the UK, can they? They still not report. They still haven't managed to sort that. So
so that's a big issue, really. And as I said, the environment and how we look after that is becoming increasingly important, because we're now beginning to see that potentially, if you look at it from a mercenary point of view, we're going to be losing markets in other parts of the world because they're going to suffer from climate change, be washed away. Got no customers, and that's a very mercenary way of looking at it. But it's got to be viewed as a global problem, just as the pandemic has got to be viewed as a global problem. Actually, addressing climate change has got to be something that people have got to get together and solve. Can't do it individually. Much as though I can set a very good example on the Alamo, as I'm sure we do.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you very much for sharing all of that. What have you got planned next?
Well, someone said to me the other day, one of my close friends said, well, you've probably got enough time left on this planet to come up with another idea.
You probably have.
I'm not so sure about that. So I think that if you begin to think that way, then it will affect what you're currently doing. So I've got to think to myself, working with the credit union, that is now my lifetime's work or whatever is left of it. But who knows? We shall see. It's coming up to years 7 and 8, so we'll have to see, won't we?
Yeah, we will. Well, I look forward to whatever it is, but the credit union has got enough to look forward to for now to keep you busy, I should have thought.
Yes, we just introduced a Visa debit card to all credit union members, and that's a great thing for people who don't have a bank account. Get the sort code and account number, get your benefits paid into it, receive loan payments and so on and so forth. You've got banker's orders in there, and you can also budget through it. So that's quite an interesting product, which isn't exclusive, but that will take time to introduce and for our membership to get used to it.
Yes, I'm sure. So are there any books that you've read recently that you'd like to recommend to our listeners as a source of inspiration?
Well, I'm not a big reader of books.
No.
A big reader of books, I have to say, but I was given a Christmas present. I have a very good friend who's very good at giving me books. And the one I read, I'm actually reading it twice now, getting into it again. It's one written by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and that's all about bringing forward basically Jewish ideas, but actually set out very, very practically. And it doesn't matter whether you've got a religious bent or not. Actually, I found it a great read, and some wonderful ideas. The end of each chapter, which is about 50, and all the chapters are only about 4 or 5 pages long, which is wonderful for me. So I do one a day, and then there's an idea at the end of that. So that to me has been a great find. The book is called Jewish Ideas. It's by Rabbi Sachs.
Jonathan Sachs, Okay.
I'll give you the full title because I'm not giving you it correctly, but I will pass it on to you.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
One of the things that came out of that, jumped out of the page at me, because this is basically what you've been talking about influences on the Isle of Man. And he says that faith is not a call to be an object, but a subject, active, not passive, to influence more than to be influenced by your environment. And I thought that was a great thing to be able to get your head round and think about it carefully. They were not meant to be just passive and wait for the environment to dictate what we do, but to actually be proactive and actually change the environment for the better. And that environment, of course, is much more than litter on the beach. We're talking about the environment that we find in total, from families to business to our lovely Isle of Man, which we talked about already.
Oh, thank you. So what's your favourite quote?
Martin Luther King came out with, in fact, I think it might still be there actually in the credit union office from when I used to run the business, accountancy business. And he had this question which stuck there on the wall. It said, the most pressing question of the day is, what are you doing for others? The most pressing question of the day is, what are you doing for others? And I used to stare at that and think, well, actually, that's a real kind of challenge and inspiration, because I think in this rather hedonistic lifestyle that we're living, where the whole centre of life seems to be on how we can find pleasurable experiences and so on and so forth. In actual fact, happiness, I think, is derived from what we give to others. That's where we get the most satisfaction in life from. It's better to give than to receive. I think that, to me, is an underlying quote that's really blessed and helped me in life. I mean, also, we do have... we all got ideas, Sharon, one way or another. And another expression that Paul Scanlon came up with, who's going back to that inspiration quote I gave earlier, where he says, we all carry a cathedral in our hearts. Because in days gone by, great English cathedrals, when they were originally designed, were never, ever completed during the lifetime of the designers, because someone took over 100 years to build. And I guess really what they're saying is that we've got a vision in our hearts. We'll never actually see it fulfilled in our lifetime, but nonetheless, we keep building one brick on top of the other and building something, hopefully, which other people will be able to inhabit.
Yeah.
And that to me has always proved to be the case, that it's never you who actually finishes it off. You're a starter, you're a middle person, or you're a completer, but you never usually can see it right through to the end. It's a bit like the other thing I once heard in my life is that preparation is for an orchestra, for a symphony that never actually has a performance. In other words, we practice away at what we're doing, but we never actually reach the final performance. It's always about rehearsal for something that's going to take place in the future. And life feels like that in many respects.
It does. If you're a sportsman, particularly, I interviewed Will Draper last week. It's all about training, training for a competition that actually may never happen at this point, but I'm sure it will. But yeah, it's difficult. Okay, well, so where can people go to learn more about you and the work that you're doing through the Manx Credit Union?
We have a website, mcu.im, which will give you the basics of what we're up to as a credit union.
We'll put those details in the note resources of the podcast, so that listeners will be able to go there and find out more there. But
sure.
I mean, that's been a wonderful interview. Thank you so much, David. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure to have you on the program and to listen and to hear so much about what you've done through your life. But I mean, the credit union it's just an outstandingly great opportunity to help others. You can't embody more than what you've done in that, really. So,
well, thank you very much for saying that, and thank you as well, because your very relaxed approach to this has helped greatly. And as I've heard to other podcasts, people are much more relaxed and likely to say things that are more helpful. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Island Influencers from Thornton Chartered Financial Planners. To find out more and for useful links, visit thorntonfs.com/podcasts.